Hello and welcome. Hello, welcome. This is a live broadcast. Surprise to everyone. I didn't announce it earlier today, but we're trying something new today. We're actually down at Audio for the Arts in downtown Madison. And I've had the pleasure to meet a special guest through a friend of mine who we're partnering on for the Fusion Resource Network. And Ruth Tongan, you came introduced to me through Andy, a mutual friend of ours, and you have a pretty interesting story and background that I'd like to learn a little bit more about. So let me set the tone here, guys. I'm writing a book called Go Far, Go Fast, and for those of you who follow me know that I've been working on this now for several months. I've been interviewing people along with it, and beyond creating a company that can accelerate its growth and sustain its growth, part of the reason we're doing that is so that the owners of that business or the leaders of that business can actually have a life that they enjoy. And that leads to where we're talking. So welcome, Ruth. Thanks for being part of this.
Thanks for inviting me.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Give me a little background of what you've done and we'll kind of work our way up to how you got here. But how'd you start your career?
I started out as a registered nurse, and I was a hospital nurse originally.
Okay. And from the hospital nurse background, how did your career progress through the healthcare industry?
I moved from being a hospital nurse and got into education and was a teacher for several years, and then gradually discovered that I knew a lot about human resources, and so I did a lot of human resource and org development work. Then I moved on and worked in the field of change management, and I was a consultant. I traveled the country for several years doing that kind of work, process design, as well as a lot of training in systems.
Mm-hmm. So when you were in the healthcare industry, when you were actually doing the management, what things did you learn about that industry or being in that field? What were the good, what were the bad, what were the ugly?
Well, I think the good, of course, was that most people who were working in that industry really cared about what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And so you had a really engaged person to work with when I was working with people and trying to train into something else or discover a new process or redesign something. And probably the downside was just the bureaucracy of the healthcare system because, a big corporation has a lot of bureaucracy to it.
Does that bureaucracy also come into play for patient safety? I've
Absolutely
seen some of that, and there
Yes.
are redundancies to protect the patients.
Yes, I did a little stint in risk management, so I really got to see how slowly things could move or how quickly we could throw people off by doing something out of the ordinary. And, that's necessary. It's one of the most regulated industries, and it has to be that way because we don't know how else to do it.
Right.
But yeah, it's a very careful, delicately examined industry.
So what'd you learn about managing people while you were working in the hospital?
I think, first of all, that everybody has something important that they can bring, and it's about uncovering that.
Okay.
And sometimes the system isn't the perfect fit. I really got to be a big advocate for helping people move on. So if they were in the wrong place and they weren't happy there, I really helped them look at where else might they be happier. And I felt like the organization would benefit from that as well.
Right. So clients, right people, right fit.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, when you moved into consulting side of it,
Yes.
what were the things that you were doing there? How did your role change as you moved towards consulting?
Boy, I did a lot of different things consulting. So I created a lot of systems and a lot of programs. And so I would take a problem that a corporation would have, and they'd say, this isn't working, what are we going to do about it? So I'd do the analytics, come up with ideas and brainstorm a new system, create the architecture of the new system, and then figure out how do we get that moving. And so go right into how to implement and really make it happen as opposed to just say it's happening.
Now, as somebody who also works from the outside in, consulting can sometimes be challenging because when you're implementing new systems, there isn't always a lot of buy-in sometimes because you're upsetting
Yes.
the apple cart. How did you go about getting greater buy-in from the team on board so that way we could implement the changes that you were trying to implement?
Well, that was how I ended up detouring into the field of change management because I was seeing how slow it was for, a new system to be adopted. And I was also going through a lot of mergers and acquisitions work and seeing that people really needed to understand the why of something. A lot of times employees were involved in the how. They might have been involved at the what, but they really didn't understand the why. And so it was sort of a pedantic way that they were given their assignments. And so if we could back that up and really see that A, change is going to happen, B, that change back behavior is going to happen also. That's actually almost an essential part of effective change is that if there is resistance, then you uncover the final part of how something's going to be adapted well.
So let's step through it a little bit. If you're going through a change management process, why is the most important thing to address first, right? And then from there, work on the what, the how, kind of the who, what, when, where,
and the
why,
details.
how.
Yes.
Excellent. But you've moved beyond consulting, haven't you? You've
I
moved into
have.
a slightly different direction. So now let's talk about that transition because that's where I'm really interested because as a lot of my clients know and as a lot of what the book is going to talk about, it's not one thing to be successful and grow. It's another thing to be successful, grow, and also have a lifestyle outside of that. So tell me a little bit more about that transition and how you got there.
Well, my next transition from there was born out of seeing something from the healthcare standpoint where people were falling between the cracks of what our standard systems provided. And I didn't have a way to address that. I would get one of my jobs as I was a consultant was to take on $1 million cases. And back then, $1 million was a big case. And they had run the gamut of the system, and I didn't know what else to offer them. And so I started doing research. And
Can you give me an example of what, when we're going through the system, when you say that you reached that point where you couldn't help them anymore, give us an example of what was going on there so our audience can kind of understand.
Yep. So if I had somebody who had an injury or a chronic condition, and they had seen every specialist, they had had surgeries, they'd had procedures, they'd done the medication routes, everything that the medical system had to provide. I would have people go all over the country for treatment, and they wouldn't get better. And that became a curiosity for me. And it interestingly became a curiosity not just about that person that wasn't well, but about the system of the organization as well, because there seemed to be a little bit of a mirror image there.
So what were the things you were seeing within the system that might have been preventing some of that health being, the servicing of the patient?
The assumption that whatever I had to offer, the old adage about if all I have is a hammer, every problem's a nail.
Okay.
So there was some of that going on, and organizationally, there would be that piece as well. There was also the realization that when we have something in research and we say that that's going to work, when you come through a good research process, there are going to be outliers. And really in medicine, we would say if there's anything above the 30% threshold, that's considered an effective treatment. So you can imagine there are many, many outliers. And yet, whatever we would rule as the gold standard of treatment pathway was considered the thing that we should do. And yet there were all these people falling by the wayside, and we didn't know how to pay attention to that because here's what the research, quote unquote, said. Same with the organization in and of itself. We had a system. That system didn't always work, And there were outliers to the system, but we didn't know how to address the outliers to policy, procedure, et cetera.
Sure, sure. So what did you change?
What did I change in the...
Either in the system, or what did you create outside the system that helped these people?
I began to send them to, or I would get stories of people who had gone to non-traditional types of treatment. And really what I found was some of the older medicines worked better because they were more individualized. They were less broad-based. And so there was room for the individual to really be heard and to get a very specific treatment of care that was a lot more in-depth than really healthcare organizations can afford to provide. And I was intrigued by that and what a difference that made when you could take the nuances of the person and actually do something to address that rather than a broad, medication regime or a physical therapy regime, something like that.
So it was really about helping each individual patient achieve their needs versus the system, which is designed really to help
The
many.
masses.
Exactly.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you started doing this. How long have you been working in that field?
20 years.
20 years.
And I went back to school. I had to make a big decision to do that because I had a pretty good gig going.
Sure.
And to think about taking 4 more years to go back to graduate school was a huge decision.
So what'd you get your degree in then?
My master's degree is actually in Chinese medicine.
Oh, okay.
And so I studied an ancient medicine, and what I loved about it was it made all of my systems work from the past that I was so fond of make sense for the first time. And I use my Chinese medicine not only in my clinic, but also in my management consulting that I still do.
So tell me more about that. How do you apply it to the management consulting?
Chinese medicine is based on flow, if
Sure.
you will, and it really talks about Newton's law. For every action is an equal and opposite reaction, and talks about how a system moves through that. And we talk about, okay, if something's frozen up, then how do we get, you can't just apply movement to something that's frozen. You have to do something to melt what's frozen so that there will be flow again. And oftentimes in an organization, we might just, again, apply the hammer to it, but actually it needs to be a 2 or 3 step process to get that flow moving again.
What's the situation in management consulting where you've been able to apply that, just so my listeners can understand?
Yep. Sometimes I'll be asked to go into an organization and look at, there's a conflict going on, there's a process that people aren't using, there's a failure of results, and often, I might be contracted by this CEO or, an upper level VP, and they will not only ask me to come in and do something with that, but they will tell me what the answer is. And almost always when I go in and really examine it from a systems approach and look at it from this other way of looking at it, what they're planning on doing is rather short-sighted. and that would be one thing that I would talk to your viewers about is that taking time and stepping back and seeing this from a different point of view, and that beauty of time as opposed to hurry up and let's get this fixed will serve so much better and save a lot of money.
Yet another important lesson that I write about in Go Far, Go Fast is speed is not always your friend. Sometimes that is your greatest enemy. So sometimes it does make sense to slow down.
Yes. Yeah. And really, really spend time on problem identification and very clear problem identification, not based on bias that you might already have, but based on just really hearing what your team is telling you. Because if you've already got a solution in mind, you're going to, twist whatever the problem is to fit the solution, and go in with an open mind and be creative and come up with something unconventional as a solution.
That's very good. So you actually, Andy is a friend of mine, and he's part of Fusion Resource Network. He's sitting off camera and probably flipping me off too. But you met him at a speaking engagement that you were the speaker at. What was the topic that you were talking about there?
I was talking about the transition to retirement.
Okay. How did you get... Okay, now we're in Eastern medicine. Now how'd you get here?
Yeah. That came out of Eastern medicine because I was seeing people in my clinic year after year after year, and I was watching with a great deal of interest as people would come in, let's say starting a year ahead of when they would retire, on through maybe 3, 4, 5 years into retirement. And there were just a whole host of health issues that would go on in that phase. And coupled with, I have a background in geriatrics, and watching people from the time I was very little. I grew up in nursing homes. And so I've been really fascinated with how we age all of my life. And so I kept seeing that there was nothing being done about how we transitioned into retirement. And people would assume it's going to be about golf and it's going to be about traveling.
That works for about 30 days.
That's exactly right. And it doesn't address what you're going to do Tuesday at 3. So that became a curiosity, and I started thinking about how all of my different backgrounds sort of folded together to address this. And I began doing research and finally began trotting that out. And so I work with people who are going through that process.
So what's the process of taking somebody from pre-retirement to in the process of retiring to finally taking that final step into retirement? What are the steps you walk them through?
Well, everybody asks me that, and I will tell you that there aren't a set of steps.
Good.
A couple of things I would say is transition time. On average, the distress of the transition is about 18 months. I would tell you that people who have not been attached to their work in any way will struggle a great deal less with their transition than those who have derived some form of their identity out of it. And that's often who I end up working with, is somebody who's been CEO, business owner, upper level executive. And so they're used to, first of all, being received places in a certain way, and they're used to introducing themselves as this thing that they do. And as they think about moving into who am I going to be when I'm not this,
right?
That process of trying to reinvent oneself is important.
So it's almost like creating, like a business owner would create a vision, but they would do that for themselves personally or for their family, and then from there set up their goals and action steps. And it's basically creating a personal business plan.
Exactly right. Great way to say that. And it looks
so this
different.
is how it aligns, guys.
Yeah. And I say it's really important to understand that no matter what your age is, you might be 40 right now, you might be 35 right now, and people say, oh, I'm not going to ever struggle with that. Well, live your life now so you won't struggle with that later.
I actually have a client who was very defined on what his business and what he was going to do, and our conversation yesterday was completely different. He threw out that this career path is not ending, but is changing, and that's opening up other opportunities to do other things. So he's talking about doing things that are completely different from his normal profession. So we are always going through a change process, right? What we thought we were going to do at 40, we may not be doing at 50, and definitely won't be doing at 60.
Or even won't be interested in it.
That's very true. Very true.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is, so often when I talk with people, they think retirement is about what I'm not going to do anymore, and they haven't thought about what they are going to do. And our retirement, on average, if you live to retirement, your retirement is likely going to be a fair number of years. And so we can't just say we're retired for the next 25 or 30 years. we need to have something we're about
Right.
in that time.
So give me some examples of some things you're seeing people do as they're moving through this process of moving into retirement, because it is more than golf, it is more than fishing, it is more than vacationing. What are some of the other ways that they're getting engaged?
Yep. Well, first of all, I will tell you that the whole movement of unretirement is growing very rapidly. The most recent, really decent research on unretirement is that 75% of people over the age of 50 think that they will work in retirement, and 20% currently do. So the movement toward unretirement is growing quickly. That doesn't mean you're going to go back to your old job or your old business, but you're going to find something that might make use of the things you were passionate about, but you're going to do them in a new way. And it is not out of need for financial help in many cases. It is often about the need for structure.
There you go.
And so wanting something to do with the day and somewhere that I'm needed and somewhere to be. Same with volunteering.
Sure.
So a lot of people sign up to volunteer. I do a lot of work with people who are doing volunteer work to help them pick that carefully, because there is a lot of need out there, but I also believe there are really good matches for where we volunteer our time, so that it not only meets the needs of where you're volunteering, but that it lights your heart up in some way, and that will, there are lovely, lovely statistics on how that will change your health's future, your future health, I should say, if you're following that.
Yes. Good. It's good to have a purpose, right?
Purpose and meaning.
And meaning. Excellent. So as we're wrapping up here, what's something that you would share with the audience that might be helpful if they're just starting to think about this, whether it's 30 or whether it's 60? What should they do to start kind of get the ball rolling, I guess?
To think about retirement, or to think
about whatever that
transitioning?
next step is when you, as my colleague put it yesterday, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. What's the next step in growing up?
Naming it first of all,
Sure.
and then allowing full exploration and quiet time. Listening to what's going on inside, so that it isn't just the external noisiness that's guiding you, because it has to be from the inside, or the next thing that you're going to do isn't going to be the right thing either. So listening within and knowing all will be well.
Very good. Good point. Ruth, how can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out?
They can reach me at Think to Perform. So it's think2perform.com, and they can reach out to me through that website.
Excellent. Ruth, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it. Audience, I hope you learned a lot. Surprise with the live. We spent probably about 20 minutes talking here. Ruth had some great insight and information. Definitely check out Go Far, Go Fast. We've got a Facebook page. I believe there's something on LinkedIn. There is also gofargofast.com, where you can look for more information from me and from guests like Ruth. So thanks again, everybody. Take care and be well.